but I think we're ready to go. This is Louise Hemmeter from Vanderbilt, and I'm doing this webinar with Lisa Fox from the University of South Florida. And we're going to kind of jump into this pretty quickly since we had that little bit of a delay. But I wanted to tell you a few things before we get started. We are muting all of your all's lines in order to eliminate the background noise. So you won't be able to talk at this point in the call, although we will have some time at the end of the call for some questions. If you have questions as we're going along, you can type them in the chat box on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And only those of us who are leading this will see it, so not everybody will be reading your questions. And we'll be addressing them at your questions at different points during the presentation. If you have a pressing question, like it's related to something I'm saying at that moment and it's confusing, you can raise your hand up in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and we'll try to get to that a little bit more quickly. But generally speaking, we'll save some time at the end of the call for questions. The other thing we wanted to tell you before we got started was that we're going to be showing a couple of videos in a minute, and so you'll want to have the speakers on your computer turned up so you'll be able to hear the video. So I'm going to jump into the content of the call now. We are here today to talk about a randomized trial that we did on the pyramid model. We often get questions about, is the pyramid model an evidence-based practice? And we've just completed one study that provides evidence for the effectiveness of the model, and are getting ready to start a second study that will replicate hopefully what we found in this study, but with more teachers in classrooms. So let me talk a little bit about the study that we did. So obviously this was a study of the teaching pyramid, and I think that this is a pretty significant study in that it's one of the first studies that has really looked at the effectiveness of a tiered model of practices for addressing social emotional development and challenging behavior. So a lot of the research in this area around social emotional development has really focused on a specific tier of the model. So, social emotional curriculum, or there have been studies of more intensive interventions or of social skills instruction, but there haven't been studies of a tiered model, particularly as it applies to young children. So in this study, we wanted to ask three basic questions, and I'll kind of summarize these for you pretty quickly. One of our questions was, we first wanted to know, could teachers implement the practices associated with the pyramid model with fidelity? And that was a really important question because of the nature of this kind of a model. It's not a model that someone can come and implement in the classroom. It really has to be implemented by the classroom teacher. And so we really needed to be sure that we had a professional development model that was effective for supporting teachers to implement the practices. And then we wanted to ask the question, if teachers implement the practices with fidelity, what are the effects of those practices on the social skills and problem behaviors of all children in a classroom? And then we wanted to ask more specifically what the effects were on the social skills of target children. And so by target children, we really meant children who teachers have rated as having significant levels of problem behavior. And so because it's a tiered model, we really wanted to know about the effects on all children in the classroom, as well as the effects on targeted groups of children. So our theory of change, this figure gives you a little bit about our theory of change and why we thought that this might work. And so we were interested, as I said, first in looking at the effects of professional development, and I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what that professional development looked like on teachers' use of the teaching pyramid practices, and then what the effects of their accurate and frequent use of the practices were on children's social and behavioral competence. And so the idea was that we had to first figure out whether teachers could be trained to use it. We had to be able to measure their use of the teapot practices or the teaching pyramid practices, and then we could look at the effects on children. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the design of the study. So this study we conducted in Nashville and in Tampa in public school classrooms. And we did it across 2 years in order to get all of the teachers. We used a randomized group design, which essentially meant that we randomly assigned teachers to either an experimental intervention classroom or a control classroom. And so half the teachers were assigned to intervention and half of the teachers were assigned to control. We only had one teacher in each school, and so we were able to assign teachers at the teacher level. And we only had one teacher in each school because we had to be concerned about whether there was any potential contamination by teachers in different conditions being in the same classroom. We had each in the same condition. We had each teacher complete the child behavior checklist on all of the children in their classroom, and then we used the data from those checklists to identify children who were in the clinical or at-risk level on the child behavior checklist, and those became the children that we identified as target children. And the assumption was that those children had higher levels of problem behavior and the need for more targeted supports. Okay, so the control teachers unfortunately participated in the study for a year, allowed us to collect data in their classrooms, but they didn't receive training until the end of the school year, so after we had collected all the data in their classroom. The implementation or the intervention teachers received a kind of packaged professional development. So they received 3 days of training. So we did 3 days of really intensive workshops where we met with small groups of teachers, 5 or 6 teachers at a time, and we did kind of group training on all levels of the pyramid, but we spent a lot of time in those group sessions stopping and talking about implementation issues, having teachers kind of self-assess themselves on practices associated with each level of the pyramid, and we had teachers beginning to think about what it was they thought they would need help implementing in the classroom. And so it wasn't your typical 3 days of large group training where we were mostly talking at them. There was a lot of discussion that went back and forth. And in most cases, the people who were going to be their coaches were in those trainings as well, and so they were starting to get to know them. The teachers also received implementation guides and materials, and the implementation guides, you can see a picture of one on this screen, were essentially examples of the practices, some ideas for activities, some ideas for songs you could sing for transitions, those really practical strategies. There were CDs that had videotaped examples and that kind of thing on them. Then on a weekly basis, and then we also gave all of the teachers a whole set of materials they would need for implementing the practices in the classroom. And so those were things like children's books and CDs and puppets and feelings charts and social stories, and we made and provided all of them with a set of those materials at the actual training, but we also made materials for them as we were going through the coaching. Then each teacher received weekly coaching. It was supposed to be weekly, although it didn't always happen that way because of different kinds of scheduling issues. But on a weekly basis, a coach would observe in their classroom, meet with them one-on-one to debrief about their observation, and then would send them a email feedback that would summarize the things that they had talked about in their debriefing session. Our coaching framework really has 3 primary components, and so one of the things I think we feel really strongly about is that we had a really systematic coaching process. And as you'll see a little bit later in this presentation, we have really pretty strong data, not just on the effects of coaching, but what the coaching actually looked like and how much what the coaches did during the actual observations and debriefing meetings. So the coaching framework had three kind of primary components, which were goal setting, observation, and feedback. And all of that was kind of driven by action planning. And all of that happened in the context of a collaborative partnership between the teacher and the coach. We talked about our coaching as occurring in phases, and so we had early coaching sessions, we had what we called ladder coaching sessions, and then we had a final coaching session. The goal of the early coaching sessions was really around relationship building, getting to know the teacher, beginning to build rapport with the teacher, observing in the classroom, getting to know the teacher's classroom, getting to know the children in the classroom, and beginning to do kind of needs assessment and initial goal setting. What you'll see on this slide is that during the early sessions, the only type of feedback we really provided to teachers was what we called supportive feedback, which means that we were mostly just giving them positive feedback on things that we were seeing that they were doing well. After about session 3 or 4, although that could vary a little bit across teachers, we really moved into more of a more intensive coaching, which was really focused on using feedback to support teachers' growth in practices on the pyramid. And so I think we were always working on maintaining a relationship with the teacher. We felt really strongly that this works best in the context of a partnership. But during these latter sessions, our protocol actually called for the use of not just supportive, but what we also considered corrective feedback, which isn't meant to infer that there was anything wrong, but is really meant to be a way of suggesting to teachers of ways they could do things differently, ways they could do things to address the individual needs of a specific child, the way they could try new things. And I think that we didn't move into doing that kind of feedback until we felt like the coaches had not necessarily a relationship, but had built rapport with the teachers. On this slide, you'll see a whole list of strategies that we used as part of our coaching. And some of these strategies we used during the actual observations. So when we were out, when the coaches were observing in the teacher's classroom, they might be taking notes, they might be modeling for the teacher, they might be practicing something with a child, they might be helping to think about the arrangement of the environment. And sometimes they might be just observing and collecting data on things that the teacher and the coach had discussed. All of our coaching is really built around an action plan that I talked about is happening in those early sessions of the coaching process. So everything that the coach and teacher do are decided ahead of time. So the coach and the teacher might decide that they're going to focus on, let's say, transitions. And so they would then discuss which transitions the teacher wanted the coach to observe when she came out to the classroom. They might say, the teacher might say, ooh, I'd really like for you to show me how to use a visual schedule to prompt a child through a transition. But whatever we would do, whatever the coach was going to do during the observation was determined by the teacher and the coach in the session before the observation. And my point there is just that there were some teachers who wanted coaches to model for them, and there were other teachers who really preferred not for the coach to model, but for the coach to observe and then describe it to them later. And I think the important thing there is that we just recognize that different teachers had different preferences around how they received feedback, and we were trying to be sensitive to that.
Mary Louise?
Yeah.
There was a couple questions that this might be a good point to address. One question was about the qualifications of our coaches.
Mm-hmm. You want me to? Yeah, so I guess So what we always say with this study, that we had kind of what we call homegrown coaches. In other words, we had coaches in our study, in this first study, that were people who had worked with us on developing the coaching model, who had worked on our projects related to the pyramid. And so we didn't have to recruit and identify coaches and train coaches specifically because they were kind of part of our team. But I think what we believe to be important qualifications of coaches are, first, I think it helps that they've really had some classroom experience. And so our teachers would often talk about how the coaches would, it was important that the coaches could demonstrate things for them. I think teachers talked about that they liked when the coach could talk about when they were a teacher, what they had tried. And so I think that first of all, I think it's good for them to have had classroom experience. The second thing, and the one that I know that there's some discussion in the field about, is I think it's important for them to know the model of practices that you're coaching on. And so I don't think that anyone can, that a person who's had experience as a coach can necessarily coach on the teaching pyramid until they themselves have been trained on the pyramid model. What else would you say, Lisa?
No, I think that covers it. I think that covers it. So the other thing that popped up is, and of course we kind of could predict that this would happen, is people are drooling at the thought of implementation guides and checklists. And so I had chatted to everyone that we're holding the guides kind of close right now because we're going to go into an even bigger study, and that's really important, that we don't have everything out on the market and contaminate our potential new experimental groups. And then the notion of an implementation checklist will talk some more about using the teaching pyramid observation tool. But that really was what anchored all of our observations and what we used to understand where teachers were in their practices.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for jumping in with those. So let me talk just about how we did the debriefing sessions with teachers. So based on our observations, based on the coaches' observations, they would do a debriefing meeting with the teachers. And we had a pretty standard, well, we had a very standard protocol that coaches used in those meetings with the teachers. And that's what you see on this slide. So there was the general opening, hello, how are you, how are things, that kind of thing. And then there was a period of time where the coach summarized her observation of the classroom, but also encouraged the teacher to reflect on what was going on in the classroom. And I think one thing that's important to remember is that all of our meetings were driven by the action plan. So like I said a minute ago, the teacher knew what the coach was going to observe when she was there, and so they were both thinking about that same thing. So the example I gave a minute ago was around transitions. So they knew that they were working on transitions. They knew that that's what the observation was going to be about. And so when they came back to debrief, they knew that that would be the primary focus of their debriefing. And so once they'd done this kind of summary observation and reflection part, the coach would usually move into giving the teacher some supportive feedback, like, gosh, well, you'll see an example of it in just a minute, but talking about things that she saw that the teacher did well, things that she saw about how children responded to what the teacher did. So that was kind of encouraging teachers to continue to do the things that were going well. And then they would move into giving corrective or constructive feedback around, during that one transition, Sherman didn't seem to know what to do. What might you do next time to help him know what to do during transition? So it was given in that kind of a way. So it didn't quite work today. What's something we could do different? Or here's an idea I had. or let's think about some things you could do differently next time. And so that was what we considered to be corrective feedback. Then we talked about targeted support. So that was really, does the teacher have a question or need help around a specific problem, a specific situation, or a specific child, or a specific behavior. They then made plans for what they were going to do in the following week, what they were going to do during the observation, what they were going to be doing, what the teacher was going to be working on in the classroom, what kind of feedback the teacher wanted the coach to, or what kind of data or observation the teacher wanted the coach to do when she came out to the classroom. So that was all planned, and then they would end the meeting and just make plans for subsequent meetings. So let me show you a video. This is a video of one of the teachers in our study and one of the coaches. And this teacher was wanting to put in place Tucker the Turtle, which I think most of y'all know is a strategy for helping children learn how to calm down. So I'm going to play this video, and what I want you to watch for is how the coach delivers what we consider to be supportive feedback. Okay, let's see if I can make this work. Jill, oh, there we go. Okay.
I know. So much fun. So speaking of all that, I saw great things today. So your turtle area looks incredibly cute.
Yes.
So the mom came in and helped with that?
Yes, and then I had the kids all help to paint it. So it's not completely painted, but every kid's handiwork is on it.
Nice. So it's really representative of your class.
Yes.
So it's unique. It's something completely different only your class has. Everybody feels a little bit of ownership over it.
Yes.
And that it looked really cute. I was in my mind thinking, I don't have the creativity to think how to put boxes into a turtle. I'm sure that they do. So it looks so good. It had the hat and the mouth.
And the little nose.
That was so cute. She did a great job with it. You all did a great job with it. So that looked really good. And the kids really got it. So we read the scripted story today, the Tucker the Turtle story, and talked through it with the kids, and they just kind of knew. And I don't know if you had a chance to see this, but when they were in line at the end, one little boy asked another little boy something about Tucker the Turtle, because they were kind of close to the Tucker area, and one of your little boys knew exactly what it was all about. He said, that's when you need to stop and think and take deep breaths.
Okay, so so in that slide, one of the things I really like about that video is that the coach asks the teacher to talk a little bit about what went well. The coach gives her some feedback about how she could tell that she was really what she had done related to Tucker. But the other thing I really like is that the coach not only talks about what the teacher did, but she talks about how the child responded to what the teacher did. And I think that ultimately that's the important thing, is not just that the teacher is implementing the practices, but that they're having some effect on children. And so in that video clip you saw Kathleen, the coach, giving feedback both on the teacher and how the child responded to the teacher, or how the children responded to the teacher. In this next video, what you're going to see is the coach using sorry, I'm trying to get this on here, data to actually provide the teacher with feedback. So this is a little bit, giving a little bit more in-depth feedback here.
So just to kind of orient us back to the action plan every week, beginning of the year worked a lot on centers, and now we've been talking a lot about social emotional skills, friendship skills, problem solving, and over the past couple weeks we've been talking a little bit about the target child too, some kind of problem solving for him. So that's where we've been going, our map for the year. And what I wanted to share with you, since this is our last session, and not this week, but the week before I did my formal teapot where I do that more formal observation. So I wanted to share that data with you again. Now that we're there, and you can tell that this graph has each of them going back to December, February, the beginning of March, and now the end of March. And this light blue one is the end of March. So the most recent one that I did is the light blue one. And you might remember we talked about last time, I had to kind of readjust to make sure that I was matching how Claudia was matching things. So I wanted to make sure that I was giving you an honest perspective of what was going on in the room. And so this time I looked at it the same way, and you can tell that things are going really well. Your environment and routines environment has been consistently at 100% the entire time. You have your rules posted, your schedule, all of that. The areas that have seen the most growth, I would say, are your engagement. I think the flip chart had a lot to do with that week that I was there. You had the flip chart that kept it really structured, and you had the movements for the kids to do. So that had kids actively engaged, and you kind of adapted things pretty quickly for them, like the hello goodbye song. You adapted it to shorten it. So that's a perfect example of if kids start to lose a little bit of engagement, you responded by changing something that you were doing. So that's something that bumps that up, and those are all those things. The more actively engaged you keep kids on the carpet, the higher that score goes. So that one's one that's is a good strength, and you got a lot of change in that one. That's past time. Behavior expectations, you went over the rules at group time, and that bumped that one up. The only things to do, this one is a hard one to get, but you got a start on it, which is really good. So you went over the rules with the kids with the rules wrap. The only way to bump it, or the best ways to bump this one up then, are to make the rules part of your vocabulary all the time, just part of the language you speak all the time. So throughout the day, when you see kids following directions, you praise them for following directions. You praise them for respecting each other, for keeping the classroom neat and clean. Or if kids are throwing things in one of the centers, remember, we need to take care of our things and keep the classroom neat and clean. That's what we do. Those are our rules, and that would bump that one up. So those are the biggies for that one. Providing directions is really good. You have the
Okay, so that in that video, that was towards the very end of coaching, and so the coach was really discussing with the teacher what had happened throughout the coaching process, but also helping the teacher think about what she might continue to work on or what she might work on in the following school year, because this would be at the end of the school year. I think one of the important things about this video is that we used graphs with teachers at other points in the coaching process, but we wouldn't have used them early on. It's something that, and especially because sometimes teapot data will look pretty low at the beginning in a lot of areas, and I think that can be somewhat obviously could be discouraging to teachers. And so sometimes when we do start using data, we might not. So Kathleen's showing this teacher a graph of all of her data on all areas of the teapot. Early on, we might choose to just use a graph of the specific thing that the teacher's working on at that point and start with graphs that way. But by this point, the teacher was familiar with the graphs, was familiar with all the different areas, and so at this point it was appropriate to use the whole graph. In addition to the debriefing session, we sent an email feedback to the teachers following each debriefing session that would summarize what we talked about during the debriefing session, but which would also connect them to additional information that they'd requested, give them additional ideas, and make plans for the next observation. So I think at this point we wanted to see if people had questions. Lisa, do you have some questions?
Two questions were typed in, and I'll share those with you, but also remind everyone you can raise your hand and then we can actually call on you and talk to you, unmute the line and talk to you. One question, and these are just kind of questions not directly related to study procedures, but pop up when people think about your study procedures. One is Tara brought up that she's actually encountered people saying the teapot is a contract violation and can't be used, and some people are expressing she's concerned about that and wondered if that had happened in other places. And maybe you could just address kind of under the conditions in which we use the teapot.
So a contract violation in what way, do you know?
Yeah, Tara are you willing to talk about that a little bit? I would assume that it's a contract that it's being interpreted as being evaluatory, an evaluation, and that they're approved through the contract evaluation tools that can be used.
Yeah, so I don't know specific to that question. I think I can talk about our experiences, and then I think if you have additional questions about this specific issue, we can try to address them. But first of all, our teachers in our study have all volunteered to participate in this, and it's a study that's been approved by the school districts in which we're working, and the school districts in which we are working have said that it was fine for us to use the teapot. We really haven't had that issue pop up even in our work out in states that I know of, but there could well be issues that we haven't heard about.
The other question there's two questions. One is people are very excited about the coaching framework and how to be a coach, how to use these techniques and practices, and are wondering about how they could access training. And people also are jazzed about the notion of the teapot as a tool to use in your coaching and would like to be able to access training in that as well.
Okay, so we're excited about all of that too. So the good news about the teapot is that we're in the process of actually publishing it, and so it's going to be available commercially, but not for about a year. And then there will be training opportunities kind of connected to that. In the short term, if you want to use the teapot, you really just need to get in touch with Lisa is the best person to get in touch with about that. And we have people who can do training on the teapot, but we don't have the resources to send people out to do training. But if your state wanted to do training or a community wanted to do training and had some resources to support a person, we have people who can come out and do that training. The issue around coaching is a little bit harder. We've been developing some materials on coaching that we can share and that we'll be sure are available on the TAXI website. And I think, in the future we would like to create more opportunities for providing coach training, but we don't have those really systematic yet. What would you add to that, Lisa?
I think people just need to kind of stay tuned around coaching. I think as a field we're all on the cusp of working hard on coaching, developing materials around that, and there'll be more and more opportunities, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. The other thing, I just want to go back to this because I'm kind of reading these chats that are coming through about the teapot. So I want to be really clear that we do not use the teapot for the purposes of evaluation. So we're using the teapot as a tool for our research, and when someone does the teapot in our research projects where it's a data collection tool, meaning we're using it to analyze data, someone goes out who is blind to the condition the teacher's in, who's not connected to the school system, and does the teapot, and those data aren't shared with anybody outside of our project. Our coaches also do the teapot, but they're doing it for the purposes of coaching, not for the purposes of supervision or evaluation. And so those data are only shared with the teacher, and we actually agree that they can't be shared with anyone beyond the teacher. Okay, Lisa.
Yeah, I don't think we have any other questions that are directly related. There is one in the chat you can handle that's about positive solutions as an evidence-based approach and pre-post testing. So I'll let you take that on. So I'm going to move us ahead. Sorry, it took me a little while to remember how to drive the slides. And talk a little bit then about, Mary Louise has covered what we did. I'm going to cover what ended up happening and what we found out from our study. I do have to warn you that somebody out in the hall said, they're going to test our emergency system today. So if indeed they test our emergency system, I'm going to quickly mute myself because it's an obnoxious sound. And Mary Louise, you're going to jump in.
Okay.
So hang on every word, because I'm going to have to get you to jump in for me, and I apologize to everybody. They never tell you that enough in advance that you can prepare. So what our coaches coached until we got teachers. We kept coaching until we felt like they were getting to the point of fidelity, not felt, but knew from doing our teapots. And also as the year wound down, we had one school year to work with our teachers. And so what we were able to do is get in a range of coaching sessions between 12 to 16. Some of our teachers got to very high points of fidelity, and other people, everyone moved significantly, and we'll show you those data, and some more than others. So the range of coaching sessions were pretty broad, from 7 to 17, but the average number of coaching sessions teachers got were 13. So in reflecting on this slide, they got a substantial amount of coaching, not just in a weekly visit, but also in the duration of those visits. And so you see data here about the early sessions, how much time our coaches spent in observation, and how much time they spent in their debriefing, and those are minutes. Both for our early sessions and then sessions 3 and beyond, where they had more of a relationship. They may have spent a little less time on the average in those observations and a little less time in the debriefing because they could be more efficient in their coaching interactions. We measured fidelity of coaching, and the way we did that was we audio taped the coach debriefing sessions, and we scored those audio tapes. So we had a real, what I would say, a pretty structured protocol that our coaches were to follow. And so we also had our coaches complete a log of the strategies that they used, so that we made sure that we would be able to say later what was coaching, not the amorphous black box of coaching, but what really happened in our coaching approach. So we've charted those data, and they're interesting to examine what coaches did, what of those strategies did coaches use, and if those strategies were different in the early sessions where we were doing action planning and building the relationship versus the latter sessions where we had a good flow for that. And so here are the strategies used in observation. And you can see in the early sessions, we always had a heavy dose of observing, because we're learning about the teacher and we're learning about the classroom. You'll also see, and I think it's interesting, let me see if I can move the little pointer thing, that over here on other help in the classroom, so we see that our coaches kind of jumped in and pitched in a little bit. You don't want to be too hands-on, and we never are hands-on without asking teacher permission. But our coaches would say, oh, can I help you do that at key times when they were in classrooms in our early sessions, because that's a good rapport builder with teachers. We didn't do a lot of modeling in the early sessions as compared in the latter sessions, and we wouldn't do modeling during an observation unless our teachers said, I'm comfortable with that, and go ahead. You know, in the early sessions, you really want to be learning about your teachers and learning about what your teachers are doing. We see more reflective conversations and observation because we've got rapport and a relationship, and we can do that in the side-by-side, more side-by-side verbal support. And I think that is because once we're in a rhythm with our teachers, the coaches had a better relationship and more opportunities to do that, and it would be comfortable for teachers. In the debriefing, we also see some differences in what our coaches were using. So in our debriefing in our early, of course, we're doing much more goal setting and planning. And then a difference to note is that in our debriefing sessions, more in the latter, is lots and lots of feedback. So we're giving a lot of both supportive feedback as well as that more critical, constructive feedback or corrective feedback to help folks as they begin are implementing. Mayor Louise mentioned the graphical feedback was in the latter sessions. We don't do that in early sessions. We really need teachers to be in a comfortable place, good relationship, and really understanding about their effort in the movement of practices in the latter sessions. We see greater use of problem solving in our latter sessions in debriefing and greater use of reflective conversations. And again, that's about the relationship that's been developed between the coach and the teacher and their comfort for those strategies being used. In terms of understanding what happened, we want to understand multiple things here. We wanted to understand the influence of implementing the pyramid on the classroom. And so the classroom observation scoring system was one measure that we used to see influence of the classroom in general. We wanted to see the influence of our coaching on teachers' implementation of the pyramid model practices, and that was measured using the teaching pyramid observation tool. We wanted to see whether or not we were influencing those target children. So we wanted to see if among children who were identified as having challenging behavior, did the implementation of pyramid practices affect those children? But we were also very interested in all children in the classroom. And in order, for those of you who have conducted research or those of you who are supporting teachers can probably appreciate, in order to get a measure on all children, we needed to have a measure that was efficient and easy for teachers to conduct, as well as psychometrically sound. And we used the social skills improvement system because it measured two variables that are really important to us, social skills and problem behavior. And it was a measure that psychometrically sound and teachers could complete relatively quickly. It's a rating scale. We did the Eckers, and we did the Eckers more to understand the classroom and to be able to describe the quality of the classroom environment. And in many ways, the class can be used in that manner as well. So we set up the experiment to do 4 waves of measures about 7 to 8 weeks apart. So we did a wave where we did a teapot in a class and we observed the target child. And we did the SSIS. We did those in the fall and the spring, the social skills improvement systems. We had teachers complete those. So the second wave was conducted about the time that teachers had just completed coaching, our teachers in the experimental condition, and had probably 2 coaching visits. Then we did another wave in the spring, and then we did another wave at the end of the school year. And that, doing those multiple waves then would give us a window on how people were changing over time, which was important for us to know. So the teapot, for those of you who are not familiar with that, we developed that. It's been under development for quite a while, but we actually, in our very first year of our grant, did a separate study on it to establish its psychometrics. The teapot really tells us the quality of the implementation of pyramid model practices. It allows us to compare teachers to other teachers to see what level of implementation is going on. But I think really a very valuable aspect of the teapot has been around its ability to expose what teachers might need more support and coaching on. So it really is a great measure for identifying the teacher's professional development needs in implementing pyramid practices, as well as that teacher's strength in implementing those pyramid practices. So let's look at some data. The data you see here are the implementation of pyramid practices. So the score of pyramid practices that teachers are implementing. Your red line are our control group teachers, and the blue line are the intervention teachers, teachers who receive training and coaching. At wave 1, you'll see, kind of curiously, that our control teachers are a little bit higher than our experimental teachers. This difference is not significant, statistically significant, but we did then look at our pretest scores as we did our analysis because teachers started in a different place. This data point occurred where our experimental teachers had training in about 2 coaching sessions. And what's so interesting to me is right then we don't see teachers taking off. Of course, we all know that in the field, that teachers don't just take off with training. You don't leave a workshop fully equipped and all of a sudden you see those differences. But it's actually quite a process to get people to implementation. Then we see our teachers really taking off in the experimental condition. And at wave 4, that is our final wave of measures that occurred late April. On the teapot, we see significant differences between our intervention teachers and our control teachers. And so what we can say from this is that training plus coaching does work for getting teachers to fidelity on the implementation of the pyramid model practices. You might say, well, that's kind of a sure question, like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But it's very important to establish that the training and coaching makes a difference for getting teachers to implementation fidelity. In terms of the children, and again, it's the Social Skills Improvement System, which is a measure that gives us a measure on social skills and a measure on problem behavior. We examined it for both our target children and the non-target children. The target children were children who actually had levels of problem behavior identified at the beginning of the study. And what's very exciting here is we have a statistically significant difference and a notable difference from an effect size perspective on the children who are in the intervention classroom. So we see that the kids who had challenging behavior had a reduction of behavior challenges of the children in our intervention classrooms. We also saw differences, and the effect size is testimony to that, in children's social skills. Mary Louise, I'm going to let you take this.
Okay. Okay, so Lise, so I don't know how there's that little arrow. So what she was in the process of saying was that even though we saw changes in children's social skills, they weren't statistically significant. And that's what that little asterisk means in terms of the problem behavior. For the non-target children, which is a kind of interesting, an interesting thing is that for the non-target children, so these were children who teachers didn't identify as having problem behavior, we actually saw an improvement in their social skills as compared to children who were in the control group. And that was based on teacher ratings, but we didn't see that same effect on problem behavior for non-target children, which we wouldn't have expected because, as you can see from these scores, with an average being 100, the children didn't really have problem behavior. So nor would we have expected them to, since they were not target children. So essentially, I think what this slide tells us is that for target children, in terms of teacher report, we see a statistically significant change in their problem behavior for non-target children in their social skills. Now these data,
and Mel, I'm back if
okay.
you want to talk.
You can take off. I'm on to the
okay, great.
Yeah.
Sorry for that interruption. Okay. So these data are actually direct observation data. And of course, direct observation measures, Mary Louise and I would both point out to you that we think are really strong and important. These are when we're actually watching these target children in their interactions. And what you see plotted here are the positive social interactions during an observation period, 60 minutes. So we had a good long observation of these children. And we wanted to see if we can see the differences, not just on the rating scale. And so on the red line, again, this is across the control children. What's really interesting is without teachers implementing pyramid practices, we actually see these target children in the control classrooms having a reduction in their social interactions, and we see the children in the intervention classrooms having a statistically significant difference through their participation in the pyramid model classrooms, which is really exciting for us because our pyramid model is about teaching children social skills and helping children within their social interactions. The next graph is a little complex in how it looks, but again, our red is our control and our blue are our intervention conditions. And what we see here is across the horizontal are the teapot scores at wave 4. And so these are the blue are our intervention teachers' teapots. And we see it crossed with social skills, standard scores. So we're looking at the influence of implementation as measured by the teapot on children's social skills. And what the graph tells us is that when you're in the treatment group and you have high teapot scores, you have high social skills scores. And so that means that the implementation of the pyramid practices, high implementation, influences and mediates children's social skills. There's also the fact that these cross and intersect indicates to us that there's something about our treatment group being a part of that intervention group that also influences social skills, because we see some of our high implementers here that are in our red, a little red mark. Those are our control teachers that are high implementation, but their social skills are not quite as high as when we have a blue teacher in her implementation. So what we have here is evidence that implementation fidelity makes a huge difference in whether or not children are successful in terms of their social skills. All right, so let's move ahead just to some general discussion. Were there any more questions that have
there were a couple of questions, Lisa. One was, and this is more kind of discussion and implications, so maybe you can just move into that. Someone asked the question about for teapot to really be used, especially in school, they need buy-in from administrators and principals, and do we have any ideas about ways to train principals on the pyramid and the teapot in a kind of concise way?
So I'll give you my 2 cents, but Mary Louise, you may have a response to that. So, we do have in the wonderful materials that Suffolk has developed around training people in the pyramid model, we regard that Module 4 as giving you the tools for exposing principals and administrators about the value of the pyramid model, what bringing that to their organization means, and what the impact could be. And I would look there first. I think those materials are really great. We're going to have a new edition out probably in another month on that Module 4. With an update on that.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing I would add is that we hope to have pretty soon a quick one-pager on this study, which I think will be helpful to share with administrators. And then there's different materials we have that provide kind of an overview of the pyramid, like we have a 20-minute video that I think kind of shows the pyramid in action. And those are some ways that I think you can help people see what the pyramid is in a really quick way. But I think for principals, you really need the data piece as well.
And this webinar will be on the website too, so people could access that as well. So some things we think about when we reflect on our experiment and what we did was, first of all, the teapot was a major tool that we used. And although the teapot measures this implementation fidelity of all of the practices, the pyramid model is complex. And in many ways, there are other levels of implementation fidelity that are of interest when you implement the pyramid model. For example, if when you're implementing the pyramid model, you want to make sure that children who need individualized social skills instruction get that individualized help, and you've made a plan to do that, a question that would be of interest is, well, did the teacher deliver that? Did they deliver interventions as intended? And of course, children on the who may receive interventions on the tertiary level of the pyramid model, we want to make sure that those were implemented as intended. And so what the teapot doesn't do is captures the teacher's capacity to bring the whole all the pyramid practices to her work and within the classroom, but it doesn't capture from the child's perspective, did I get the intervention designed as intended, or the dosage of that intervention as it was intended. So that's something to think about as we will be thinking about as we do our future research, but it's also important for people to realize as they think about measures and the utility of those measures. The other thing that we think about is, we use that social skills improvement system as this primary measure of social and behavior. And so because we use that, we were reliant on teachers' report because it is a teacher rating scale. Well, really frankly, there are not many social skills measures, if any, that are good, psychometrically sound, efficient, direct observation measures. But because it's a teacher report measure, we have to ask, did we really change children, or did the implementation of the pyramid model change children, or did we change teachers' perceptions of those children? And Mary Louise, you have a good response to that when we think about that.
About whether we changed, well, right. So I guess what I think about that is that a lot of the reason that we do the work we do is because of teachers reporting that children have problem behavior. So if you look for data on increases in children with problem behaviors in classrooms, almost always those data are based on teacher report. And so my feeling is that that our ultimate goal is really to change kids' behavior, but it's also important that teachers perceive that there's a change in problem behavior. And so I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think sometimes that some problem behavior is really about adults, not just teachers, but parents, not understanding that the behavior is communicative, and once they get that, they don't see the behavior as maybe as being as challenging as they did before. And so I think this is a very long-winded way of saying that I think even changing teacher perception of problem behavior is a meaningful outcome.
Mm-hmm. So the other things we might think about too is we would love to have more direct measurement of child outcomes. It was really difficult and challenging in this experiment, and I think you guys can appreciate what went on in these classrooms, how much data we collected, and we try to do that in a manner that's not intrusive and that we're not having data collectors actually living in classrooms year-round. But we want to get good observational data on children, and that's expensive data to gather, expensive data to analyze. But it is our intention that we're able to get that in future experiments. What we didn't do in this experiment, and that we have the intention to do in future experiments, is to also ask the question of what else changes in terms of child outcomes. So we know we are influencing social skills, and we're influencing problem behavior or the reduction of problem behavior, but are we also influencing measures of children's pre-academic or school readiness or overall development? And we think that's a really important question, especially in the climate today of being very focused on children's school readiness within some programs, that we want to have those kind of data to be able to analyze what happens with children in terms of their learning. And then there are other measures that we haven't used in the past that other people use when they're examining changes in children's social competence that really measure, that are called executive function measures. And they may capture things like children's self-regulation ability, changes in children's impulsivity, those kinds of things, children's capacity for problem solving. And we have been thinking that those are interesting measures and may also contribute to understanding how the pyramid model works and how the pyramid model influences child change. Mary Louise, do you have any comments about that?
No, I mean, I think that, you know, in the size of the studies we're doing limits what we can measure. And so I think that the executive function measures, we don't have any really great data yet to say that those impact children's behavior in the classroom. And I think we've been driven in our work by looking for reductions in children's problem behavior, and that we think the measures we're using are more accurate measures of that, what we're specifically looking for. But given a lot more money, I think we would want to look at some of the executive function measures as well.
So some of the implications of these data, first of all, the effectiveness of the professional development approach. So we have really nice, clear data that this way that we're approaching coaching makes a difference for teachers. Our teachers, we have some focus group information we haven't summarized here, and some feedback from our teachers who are involved in this experiment. They gave us great feedback around how we approach coaching, around what the coaches brought to their practice, and the feedback that they received from the coaches. So we have good quantitative data that the coaching model makes differences, and we have some nice qualitative data around the acceptability of this kind of coaching approach. We also have some really nice, strong data around the implementation and its relationship to child social and behavioral outcomes, which we think is really important. The kind of study that we did have limited resources, and people in the research world would say, you know, we had a study that was somewhat underpowered in the number of participants to examine the multiple outcomes that we were trying to examine. So given that, and that we still were able to see statistically significant differences, is really important and really exciting. Some things that we're thinking about and could be addressed in future work by somebody or by ourselves is really looking at different approaches to training and delivering coaching. You know, we used one model of coaching which was informed a lot from an instructional coaching model that was expert providing that coaching, or someone deeply familiar with the intervention that we were trying to get teachers to implement. There are different kinds of coaching approaches: peer coaching, distance coaching, self-coaching. And I think we as investigators in this work, and I know those of you in the field are really interested in that, we're interested in teacher characteristics and the intersection between those characteristics and different kinds of coaching processes. It might be possible that there's different ways to coach different kinds of teachers, or there are ways to package multiple forms of coaching to come up with the most efficient and effective coaching processes. We wonder if there are different coaching formats around different targets. We were coaching a really complex outcome. We were coaching the pyramid model as a whole. That's big and that's complicated. Mary Louise, I think you have some data around coaching more discrete skills or practices.
Right, yes. So we did, like, for example, well, a couple of studies. One where we, one specifically one where we were coaching teachers just to use descriptive praise, so positive descriptive feedback. And we did that primarily through email feedback. And our interest in doing that was, is there a way to deliver coaching, in more efficient but equally effective ways? And so I think we have some initial evidence that that works, but then when we tried to do that same thing with more kind of multiple components of the pyramid, we were a little less successful. So I think that it's probably a match between what the target is and the delivery format that probably makes the difference.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that we would love to address, and Mary Louise and I talk about it quite a bit, is program-wide implementation, and how if you have the whole program on board, if we have the pure model, program-wide implementation of the pyramid, everyone's on board, it's a goal of the administrator, families are engaged in it, all of those elements of program-wide adoption, would that then actually make the coaching process more efficient? Could we get by with less coaching or different forms of coaching in order to get to teachers to fidelity? And we have some ideas about it. This experiment was done in schools where teachers were working in classrooms and we weren't doing program-wide. The whole school might have been implementing PBIS or pyramid or not. And so we're really anxious to see, what does this look like when we do it within program-wide implementation sites?
Lisa, can I jump in here with a few questions?
Sure.
Or were you finished with your thought on that? Sorry.
I was finished with my thought, and I was about to segue too, so go ahead.
Okay, so I want to just comment on a few questions and then have you. So one person asked a question about positive solutions, and that's the parent modules we've developed that map onto the teaching pyramid. And I believe that we have not developed pre-post questionnaires as a center on either of the centers, but I believe some of our colleagues have. So if you have that question, perhaps you can email me directly, or we'll try to figure out a way to post something related to that. But I would basically hook you up with some people who I think do have those data, or have those might have those tools. Okay, Lisa, let's see. And one other point that I thought was a really good point was when we were making the point about principals and administrators, one of our colleagues in North Carolina suggested, and I think this is right, that they found that if you can link what we're doing to the PBS terminology that principals already know, that seems to resonate with them. And so Lisa and I have pretty strong feelings about what is different when you do PBS with young kids versus K-12. But I do think that principals know that language of PBS, and that the extent to which you can link the two models will be important. Go ahead.
Oh, so before you leave the PBIS topic, so we will be having a webinar in, Jill will know the date, I think it's July or August, it might be August, with George Sugai of a discussion about PBIS and the pyramid model. And if it all goes well, the way I hope it goes, I think it's going to end up being a really nice piece that you'll be able to use to help people understand the intersection between the pyramid model and PBIS, and some acknowledgement from someone from PBIS.org around the importance of a developmentally appropriate version that is true to the core elements of a PBIS approach.
All right. The last question that I see here is someone has a question about whether we'll be doing the same study that we just did in child care centers. And I think that is a really good question, and the question is really addressing a really important question, which is how do you do this in places that have fewer resources and staff and that kind of thing. We don't have plans to do that kind of study in the near future because we're still trying to figure out how to do it in schools. But I do think it's something that clearly needs to be done. And then Jill, there was one other question maybe you can, or Lisa, maybe you know, is when we post the PowerPoint, is the recording for the webinar also going to be available?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that you could hear me. That's right.
So it'll be available on the Taxi website, right?
Right, in about a week. And if folks follow Taxi on Facebook, we will, it might be earlier than that, but we will post it the moment that we get the video on the website on Facebook.
So before we wind down, we had kind of a shaky start, and what we need to make sure that you understand is Mary Louise and I are presenting these data, but these data would not be possible without our colleagues Pat Snyder and Jamie Algina at the University of Florida, who also were co-principal investigators in this research project. This was a collaboration between Vanderbilt, University of South Florida, and the University of Florida. And we made a great team for this study, and we're really excited that in the fall we'll be starting another study. It's kind of bigger, more measures, and hopefully give us some more of the questions that we have around the pyramid model. We also want to acknowledge all of these people, the whole host of data collectors and coaches that worked with us on the study. These kinds of research projects are huge and complex, and all of these people played key roles. Mary Louise, you have anything else to share?
No, not specifically. Do we want to see if people have questions? We have about 5 minutes.
Sure. You can raise your hand if you have a question. Or Jill, you want to unmute lines?
We can do that, or if they have a question, they can unmute their own line by pressing *7.
Okay. Katie Ladd, did you have a question, Katie? Press *7.
All right, I can find her.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just curious as far as the different types of coaching. Would you be able to list a few more of the various types or models of coaching and maybe share a little bit more about what specific types of goals those try to reach?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Lisa, if you want to add, you can. So I think that we've been working on this a lot lately. So most of the research on coaching involves the use of an expert coach, and that just means somebody with expertise in what it is you're coaching on, delivering coaching to a teacher. And it's typically delivered either as we've delivered it or as Bob Pianta and his team have delivered it, which is through is online, but it has an interactive component to it. So the teacher videotapes, shares the videotape with the coach. The coach sends the teacher some guiding questions or probes to think about while watching the videotape, and then they have a conversation via Skype or the phone. Those are the coaching models that really have pretty good data to support them. There are other ways that you could imagine doing coaching. We've done self-coaching in another project that I've worked on that didn't seem to have the same effect on teacher implementation of practices, although it had effects on some components of the practices that they were coaching on. So this was around embedded instruction for children with disabilities. And we think that self-coaching might help people learn something new, but it's not necessarily going to change their practice. And so it might be that some combination of self and live coaching might work. The other kind of coaching that we're kind of interested in is this notion of peer coaching, where that maybe is guided by someone who has some expertise in the content. But we really don't know if those other models are effective. What we would say is that for coaching to be effective, you have to have, some primary things. Some kind of collaborative partnership, whether it's live or distance. You have to have some process for goal setting, for observation, and feedback, but you could think broadly about how those things were delivered. There's lots of examples of different ways coaching can be delivered that match what I've just been talking about, but there's fewer examples of coaching being delivered in different ways and there being evidence to support that it's effective. Lisa, anything else about that?
No, you covered it. Anybody else have any questions? We probably have 1 minute left.
I think Valerie's trying to ask a question, but she's having a hard time with the system. So Valerie, if you do have a question, raise your hand. We'll try to get to you that way. Maybe not. Okay.
All right, Jill, I think that's it. Were you going to wrap us up? Or?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thanks both Lisa and Mary Louise for a great presentation, and sorry about the issues we had at the beginning. We'd like to thank all of our participants for attending this webinar today and for bearing with us while we dealt with the technical issues. Please note that a recorded version of this presentation, as we mentioned, will be available on the TAXI website in about a week. You are now being redirected to a very short online evaluation that will ask you a few questions about your experience this afternoon. Please take a moment to share your thoughts with us as we're continually working to improve our webinars, and we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. Receiving your input on the survey will definitely help us make sure we're doing that. Thank you all once again for your participation in this TAXI webinar.